Hey, folks, it's your boy, the Boss Economist, back with another episode of Boss Economics World, your one-stop shop for slicing through the government's economic baloney like a hot knife through butter. Today, we're diving headfirst into the latest circus act from Washington, starring none other than Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's out here peddling fairy tales about tax cuts, deficits, and tariffs. Buckle up, because this one's gonna be a wild ride, and trust me, the only thing shrinking here is the government's credibility, not the deficit. Alright, folks, let's set the stage. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, the latest ringmaster in the Trump administration's economic circus, has been flapping his gums in front of Congress, trying to convince us that the Republican signature tax cut bill, yep, the one that's been rammed through the House and is now being haggled over in the Senate, will magically shrink borrowing over the next decade. You heard that right, folks, shrink borrowing. Meanwhile, the non-partisan Congressional Budget Office is screaming from the rooftops that this bill will add a whopping $2.4 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. Oh, and if that's not bad enough, the brainiacs over at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School are saying, hold my beer, CBO, it's actually $2.8 trillion. But wait, there's more. Bessent's got a secret weapon up his sleeve, tariffs. You know, those import duties that President Trump loves more than a Big Mac. According to Bessent, the CBO says those tariffs will rake in $2.8 trillion over a decade, which, in his words, creates a $400 billion surplus. Cue the confetti cannons, right? Wrong. This is Washington, D.C. math, folks, where 2 plus 2 equals a unicorn riding a rainbow. And let me tell you, the only surplus we're gonna see is a surplus of headaches for American families who are already drowning in rising costs. So, grab your popcorn, because today on Boss Economics World, we're gonna peel back the layers of this economic onion, from the surface-level clownery to the deep, systemic rot that's driving us straight into a recessionary ditch. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll see why the government's mismanagement is the real villain here, not inflation, not tariffs, and certainly not your grandma's social security check. Let's start with the surface-level nonsense, shall we? Scott Bessent is out here playing a game of pick-your-own-adventure with economic data. One day, he's telling the House Ways and Means Committee, oh, it remains to be seen whether this tax bill will add to borrowing. The next day, he's in front of the Senate Finance Committee, boldly declaring, it's my view that over the 10-year window, it will decrease. Bro, make up your mind. Are you an economist or a weatherman? Because this flip-flopping is giving me whiplash. And let's talk about his beef with the CBO. The CBO, for those of you who don't know, is the gold standard of economic forecasting, non-partisan, data-driven, and not beholden to whatever political party is writing the checks. Their estimate? This tax bill will blow a $2.4 trillion hole in the deficit. But Bessent's like, nah, I disagree with their methodology. Oh, really? What's your methodology, Scott? Reading tea leaves? Consulting a magic 8-ball? Because last I checked, the CBO's track record is a heck of a lot better than the Trump administration's, which still hasn't even released its own baseline projections for the deficit, debt, or economic indicators. Transparency? More like transparity. But here's the kicker, folks, Bessent's trying to sell us this idea that tariffs will save the day. He's pointing to another CBO report that says Trump's tariff hikes will bring in $2.8 trillion over a decade, which he claims offsets the $2.4 trillion deficit increase from the tax cuts. Even in Washington, D.C. math, that's a $400 billion surplus, he says. Oh, bless his heart. This guy's out here acting like tariffs are free money, like they just fall from the sky without any consequences. Newsflash, Scott, tariffs aren't a magic piggy bank, they're a tax on American consumers and businesses. And guess what? Those costs get passed right down to you and me. Let's peel back the next layer of this economic onion, shall we? Tariffs. Oh, tariffs. The Trump administration loves to tout them as the ultimate weapon against China, Mexico, and anyone else who dares to sell us a widget. But here's the dirty little secret they don't want you to know, tariffs are a tax on us. That's right, folks, when you slap a 25% tariff on imported steel, it's not China footing the bill. It's American manufacturers who rely on that steel to make cars, appliances, and construction materials. And who do you think they pass those costs on to? You guessed it, Joe and Jane Sixpack, who are already struggling to pay their bills. Don't believe me? Let's look at the data. According to a 2024 study by the Tax Foundation, Trump's tariffs imposed during his first term cost American consumers and businesses an estimated $80 billion annually in higher prices. And that was before the latest round of tariff hikes, which are even more aggressive. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimates that if these new tariffs are fully implemented, they'll increase the average American household's annual costs by $2,600. That's not pocket change, folks, that's rent, groceries, and school supplies for millions of families. And here's the real kicker, tariffs don't even do what they're supposed to do. The whole point of tariffs is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US, right? Well, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the tariffs imposed between 2018 and 2020 resulted in a net loss of 142,000 American jobs. Why? Because when you make it more expensive for businesses to operate, they don't magically hire more workers, they cut costs, automate, or move production to other countries with lower tariffs. So, Scott Bessent's $2.8 trillion tariff surplus? It's a mirage, folks. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Sure, you might pour in some water, but it's all gonna leak out in the form of higher prices, lost jobs, and economic stagnation. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter, the systemic rot that's driving this economic clown car off a cliff. At the core of this whole debacle is the Republicans' tax cut bill, which Bessent is trying to sell as some kind of deficit-shrinking miracle. But let's call it what it is, folks, a massive giveaway to the ultra-wealthy, paid for by gutting programs that everyday Americans rely on, like Medicaid. According to the CBO, this bill will slash $1.5 trillion in spending on social safety net programs over the next decade, all while handing out $1.9 trillion in tax cuts, 80% of which go to the top 1% of earners. That's right, folks, the richest of the rich are getting a golden parachute, while the rest of us are left fighting over the crumbs. And don't give me that trickle-down nonsense, either. We've been down this road before. Remember the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? The Trump administration promised it would supercharge the economy, create millions of jobs, and pay for itself through growth. Spoiler alert, it didn't. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, job growth actually slowed in the years following the 2017 tax cuts, averaging 178,000 jobs per month from 2018 to 2019, compared to 223,000 jobs per month in the 2 years prior. And the deficit? Oh, it ballooned, folks. The CBO reported that the federal deficit hit $1.4 trillion in 2020, up from $585 billion in 2016, thanks in large part to those tax cuts. But here's the real gut punch. While corporations and the ultra-wealthy were swimming in tax breaks, everyday Americans were getting squeezed. A 2023 report from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy found that 60% of the benefits from the 2017 tax cuts went to the top 20% of earners, while the bottom 20% saw their after-tax income increase by a measly 0.8%. Meanwhile, income inequality in the U.S. has reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age, with the top 1% now holding more wealth than the entire middle class combined, according to Federal Reserve data. So, where does all this leave us, folks? In a recessionary ditch, that's where. And make no mistake, this isn't some natural economic cycle. This is a man-made disaster, courtesy of the government's gross mismanagement. Let's connect the dots. You've got tax cuts that explode the deficit, tariffs that jack up prices and kill jobs, and spending cuts that get the safety net for the most vulnerable. Add it all up, and you've got a recipe for economic stagnation, rising inequality, and a whole lot of pain for the average American. And don't let Bessent fool you with his cherry-picked data about inflation. Sure, he's out here bragging that the latest consumer price index shows the cost of living rising at the slowest pace since 2021. But let's put that in context, shall we? According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the CPI is still up 20% cumulatively since January 2021, meaning the average American family is paying $1,200 more per month for the same goods and services they were buying 4 years ago. And wages? Oh, they're not keeping up, folks. Real average hourly earnings, adjusted for inflation, have actually declined by 2.5% since 2021, according to the Economic Policy Institute. So, while Bessent's out here popping champagne over slowing inflation, the rest of us are stuck choosing between groceries and rent. Alright, folks, here's the Boss Economics world verdict. Scott Bessent and the Trump administration are selling us a bill of goods, and it's time to send it back. These tax cuts aren't gonna shrink the deficit, they're gonna blow it up, just like they did in 2017. These tariffs aren't gonna save the economy, they're gonna tank it, just like they did in 2018. And this government mismanagement? It's not just incompetence, folks, it's a deliberate choice to prioritize the rich and powerful over the rest of us. So, what's the solution? First, fire the clowns running the show. We need leaders who understand that economic policy isn't a game of monopoly, it's real life, with real consequences. Second, fix the system. That means rolling back these tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy and investing in programs that actually help everyday Americans, like universal healthcare, affordable housing, and job training. And third, ditch the tariffs. Instead of starting trade wars, let's focus on building a competitive economy through innovation, education, and infrastructure. Until then, folks, keep your eyes peeled and your wallets tight, because as long as these economic clowns are in charge, the only thing shrinking is our faith in the system. This is the Boss Economist, signing off. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next episode of Boss Economics World. Peace out.